The factory didn't breathe like this during the day. At night, it exhaled slow and steady like a sleeping beast under layers of dust and memory. The machines, usually deafening in daylight, whispered now. I ran my fingers across a loom, still warm from the afternoon run, the fibers clinging to my skin like ghosts that refused to be buried. The scent of the floor steel cotton and faint burnt dye was the only thing that ever smelled like home. Not the Morgan estate with its silent hallways and curated portraits. Not the gallery openings Brielle dragged me to with cheap champagne and expensive detachment. This was mine. And I felt it slipping. I hadn't yet seen Margaret, but I smelled her. That amber perfume, thick, cloying, aggressive, in a way that filled the stairwell like smoke from a fire already burning somewhere upstairs. She never wore it unless something was about to be signed, sealed, or severed. I climbed slowly. Each step creaked under my work boots, betraying the quiet I wished for. The oil on my hands had already seeped into the cuff of my shirt, staining it the same way the factory had stained me permanently, invisibly, undeniably. When I reached the landing, the door to Greta's old office was ajar. It should have stayed shut, because the woman behind it had no right to sit there. Margaret didn't look up. She never did. Her voice cut the silence with surgical precision. We're selling the company. No greeting. No preamble. No lie to soften the blow. Only the scent of amber and the sound of legacy being erased. The moment I smelled my mother's amber perfume, I knew something was about to be taken from me. The scent lingered unnaturally on the stairwell that led to the upstairs office. It had always nauseated me, heady, invasive cloying in a way that stuck to my throat like regret. As I ascended the creaking steps, each one a betrayal of the silence I wished for, that perfume clung harder. It reminded me of the card years ago. A red envelope for Valentine's Day addressed to me had vanished from my locker. I never proved it, but even then I'd felt Brielle's fingers on the string that made it disappear. The office door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the back of my wrist, still coated in lint and machine oil. My name hadn't even been called. The summons came via Gerald's stiff nod downstairs. No eye contact. Just a twitch of the chin and averted eyes. Margaret sat with her legs perfectly crossed behind Greta's old desk, a posture of deliberate serenity. Her blazer matched the golden stitching of the Pearson Textile's crest that was about to become irrelevant. I barely had time to close the door before she spoke. We're selling the company. I blinked. Excuse me to Carrick Holdings. They've made a generous offer and the deal will close before the end of the month. Her voice was so devoid of joy, it almost sounded compassionate until you really listened. My spine stiffened. The end of the month. You mean without any transition? No vote. There's nothing to vote on. Margaret replied, It's already done. I turned to Gerald, who stood by the window like a ghost, trapped in old panes and late autumn sun. His hands were folded, but his knuckles were white. Brielle was perched near the filing cabinet, examining her cuticles like she was waiting for a gallery opening, not the dissolution of our family's legacy. I've worked here since I was 17. I said slowly, looking at all three of them. I've poured every weekend, every holiday into this place. I built half the damn dye protocol from scratch. Margaret slid a crisp white envelope across the desk. And you will be compensated for your time. I didn't take it. I couldn't move. My fingers curled slightly, just short of shaking. I'm not asking for charity, I said, struggling to keep the crack from my voice. I'm asking for clarity, for legacy. Aunt Greta wanted this to stay in the family. That was her vision. Margaret's lips curled sharp as wire. And you're not family in any legal sense. That sentence was a scalpel, and she knew it. The silence afterward wasn't accidental. It was a space carved out for humiliation to echo. I looked to Brielle. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Is this because I'm not your blood? My voice caught. Because I was adopted. No, Margaret said flatly. It's because you were a placeholder, and the seed is no longer needed. Gerald flinched as if someone had flicked a match at his feet but said nothing. Brielle's silence was worse, it was curated. I left the envelope where it sat and walked out before Margaret could weaponize another word. The factory floor had never felt so cavernous. The looms had stopped running for the night, but the air still thrummed with the ghost of labor, the dying heat of machines that had spun generations into legacy. That night, Rachel opened an old drawer and found a faintly scorched document with the name Claire Pearson crossed out in red ink. Names don't just vanish from legal documents. Someone has to make them disappear on purpose. I stared at the scorched paper for the third time that morning, its crumpled corners still trembling between my fingertips. Claire Pearson. The ink beneath that name was faded but deliberate, crossed out in thick red slashes. There was something unsettling about the color. Too bold. Too personal. Like a warning or a sentence served. The attic was the only place left where the Morgans might have been careless. Dust bloomed around my ankles as I climbed the narrow stairs, each one whining under my weight. The amber scent of Margaret's perfume hadn't reached this high. This space smelled like mildew and old varnish, honest decay. Cardboard boxes lay crammed in every corner, sealed and resealed with yellowing tape. I picked one at random and tore it open only to find tax receipts from 1996 and a broken menorah I'd never seen used. Another box held Brielle's childhood drawings, swans with thick black outlines signed in looping cursive. Nothing of mine. I kept digging. Finally, under a moth-eaten quilt and a plastic-wrapped fake Christmas wreath, I found a stack of photo albums. My fingers shook as I flipped through them. Gerald, as a younger man, always in the background. Margaret stiff-backed in every picture. Brielle grinning in dresses I remembered as too itchy to borrow. But when I reached the years that should have held my toddler photos, the pages turned blank. A sticky residue marked where prints had been ripped out. Dates were scrawled beneath the empty photo slots. Rachel's second birthday. But the image was gone. Downstairs, the wind shifted. A draft crept beneath the attic door. I closed the albums and gathered them, heart thudding in my throat. Later that afternoon, I slipped into the factory's archive room. Evelyn Grant, the only person still on shift, didn't ask what I was doing. Maybe she already knew. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like an unwelcome truth. Steel filing cabinets lined the walls. I had no plan, just instinct. "I figured you might be looking," Evelyn said quietly behind me. I turned. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands held a cardboard box. She walked toward me with the gravity of someone delivering more than paper. "I kept this," she said. Greta asked me to. Just in case. The box was labeled Claire P. in blue ink. Inside, resting on top of old HR forms and a folder with legal notations I didn't yet understand, was a handmade Valentine's Day card. Red construction paper, uneven edges. In purple crayon, "Happy Valentine's Day, Claire." Inside, someone had written in careful adult script, "Never forget who you are." I stared at it until my vision blurred. "That's Greta's handwriting," I whispered. Evelyn nodded slowly. "She never trusted your mother." My aunt, I said, though the word felt foreign now. My eyes fell to the card again. Claire. That wasn't just a name on a scorched document, it might have been mine. I sank into the nearest chair, the box in my lap, a weight both physical and metaphysical. Questions slammed into me like freight. Had Greta tried to preserve my inheritance? Had Margaret erased me from it? Was the adoption a mask? Or a theft? Evelyn placed a folded business card on the table beside the box. It's old, but the number might still work. I picked it up. Whitmore Legal, Estates and Trusts. That night, Rachel dials a number from a yellowed business card, Whitmore Legal, Estates and Trusts. A woman answers, "This is Diana Whitmore." They changed my name, but not the truth. It's still there, trapped in old ink and brittle pages. The Whitmore legal office smelled like cedar and aging paper, nothing like the sterile white noise of corporate boardrooms. Books lined the walls, their spines faded and worn in ways that suggested memory, not neglect. Afternoon light spilled through the half-open blinds, striping the room in gold and shadow like a courtroom that hadn't yet declared its verdict. Diana Whitmore sat across from me, elegant in a subdued gray suit, her expression carved from the same marble as her silence. Between us lay 3 files opened but not yet explained. She hadn't touched her tea. I hadn't touched my breath since I walked in. She placed the first document flat. "This is an adoption record. Issued April 7th in 1994. The infant's name, Claire Pearson. I stared at it. A simple line of type on a brittle sheet of county paper. The date of birth matches yours, Rachel. She continued, voice low and exacting. Down to the hospital. But there's no official handover to Margaret and Gerald Morgan on this document. Then how this? She slid another file forward. The adoption decree filed 6 months later. It names the Morgans as guardians, but omits the biological mother's consent, which in this case was Greta Pearson. I reached for the page with shaking fingers. The name Claire had been scratched out. Beneath it in Margaret's handwriting was a correction, Rachel Ann Morgan. They renamed me. I said the words foreign on my tongue. Diana's nod was gentle but firm. Yes, but they couldn't undo the original trust Greta filed with Whitmore Legal. She opened the third file. The paper was heavier, hand-signed, marked with raised seals and Greta's uncompromising penmanship. I could almost hear her voice in it. All assets to the firstborn Pearson girl, Diana read aloud. No exceptions, no substitutions. Greta had written in thick blue ink on the final page, "If she's forced to grow up in the dark, let her find the light herself. Only then will she deserve what I've left." I leaned back in my chair, swallowing around a knot the size of my childhood. So she knew. Greta knew they'd try to erase me. She feared it, Diana said softly, and she planned for it. The trust was designed to transfer only when the rightful heir came forward, not when someone else demanded it. But if the company is already being sold, it hasn't closed yet. Diana interrupted. The trust gives you legal leverage to contest the transaction, especially if fraud was involved in removing your name. I stared at the document again. The ink felt heavier than its weight on paper. They stole my name, I murmured. To steal everything. Diana's tone sharpened. But they can't steal what was never legally theirs. The trust is airtight. You are Claire Pearson. Something inside me broke and reformed. I wasn't crying, but I was shedding something, the soft deference I'd carried for too long, the apology in my step, the invisible leash that made me say thank you every time Margaret belittled me. I want to stop the sale, I said. Diana leaned in. We can stop the sale, but we have less than 2 weeks. And they'll do anything to stop you. If truth had a scent, it would smell like dust ink and the burnt plastic of an old USB drive. The door to Pearson Textiles groaned open beneath Evelyn's keys, the hallway lights flickering on in a sluggish cascade. The factory had always breathed differently at night, less machine, more memory. The faint hum of fluorescent bulbs replaced the clatter of production, and every echo felt like it might belong to someone watching. I followed Evelyn past the storage cabinets to the room where outdated filing systems went to die. She didn't speak, only glanced back at me once, as if checking whether I still had the courage to follow this to the end. She moved a stack of manila folders and reached into a taped-up printer box. When she handed me the object wrapped in a paper towel, my fingers tightened on instinct. I've had this since the day Greta passed, she said. She didn't trust paper alone, told me to keep it off-site just in case Margaret ever came sniffing. It was a USB drive, small matte black, slightly melted at one corner like someone had dropped it too close to a radiator. We drove in silence to Diana's office. No music, no news. Just the wet sweep of tires over rain-dark streets and the tension of something sacred about to surface. Inside, Diana cleared a space on her mahogany desk, slid her laptop open, and inserted the drive. It booted without resistance. One folder, one audio file, one truth. Evelyn stepped back as the speakers clicked to life. Greta's voice came through with the steadiness of someone who had prepared every word. If you're listening, then Margaret has gone too far. Claire Pearson is the rightful heir to Pearson Textiles. I've filed a trust to that effect. Any effort to erase her name is fraud. Any attempt to sell the company without her signature is unlawful. And anyone involved will answer in court. Diana didn't blink. That's enough to shake the foundation of any sale, she murmured. We'll need corroboration, but this is gold. I know someone Evelyn offered. He was there when Greta would bring Claire through the factory every Friday. Said it gave him hope to see her running the looms barefoot. Later that evening, we knocked on the faded green door of a small house on Halston Avenue. Harold Graham was older than I remembered his posture, curved his eyes roomy but sharp. He examined the photograph Diana placed on his table me as a child, holding Greta's hand on the factory floor. "You're the girl," he said, voice cracking. "She used to call you her North Star. Said the factory would belong to you one day." His words didn't hit all at once. They unfurled like a banner, silent and heavy. Back at the law office, Diana filed the emergency injunction. The date on the papers read December 8th, 2023, exactly 2 days before Margaret's scheduled sale. "You've done it?" she said, locking the USB and Valentine card into her office safe. "It begins now." I looked down at the document before me. Affidavit of Legal Identity Restoration. The pen trembled only slightly in my grip. I signed Claire Pearson. That name burned into the page with finality. When I got home that night, my mailbox was ajar. No return address. Inside the envelope was a photo me as a child standing outside the factory in a too large coat. My eyes had been scratched out in thick black ink. A sticky note clung to the corner. "Back off." I didn't walk into that boardroom to ask for a seat. I came to reclaim the entire table. The elevator doors opened with a whisper, but the tension in my spine crackled like thunder. Diana walked beside me in silence, her briefcase swinging in quiet rhythm. She didn't need to speak. We had rehearsed this moment in 100 whispered conversations and late-night strategy calls and hushed page-turnings of documents that proved who I truly was. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, literally and figuratively. Morning light slashed across the table's glossy oak surface, catching on the polished metal clips of contract binders. The scent of amber filled the air before I even saw her Margaret's signature like poison in perfume. She stood at the head of the table, spine-straight mouth curled in polite control. Beside her, Gerald sat slack eyes distant, already halfway vanished from the room. Brielle fiddled with a bracelet, her knee bouncing under the table with a rhythm only anxiety could conduct. Margaret greeted the investment representative, Mr. Hastings, with a crisp nod and offered, "Shall we proceed?" I took a step forward. "Before anything is signed," I said, voice. Even the board must hear who I really am. All eyes turned. Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her pupils narrowed, calculating, measuring. Diana opened her case, removing a stack of legal documents and sliding them down the table one by one: the trust deed, the sealed affidavit, the adoption decree with its brutal redactions. "I am Claire Pearson," I said. "The name you erased. The one Aunt Greta intended to lead this company." A flicker of movement passed through Gerald's expression. Guilt, memory, regret, I couldn't tell. Brielle froze the bracelet now hanging forgotten on her wrist. "I have documents proving I was adopted without Greta Pearson's knowledge." I continued. "That my name was changed illegally. That I've been working under a false identity engineered by the very people claiming to sell this company today." Diana reached for the laptop and plugged in the USB. With a few keystrokes, the room filled with Aunt Greta's voice. "If you're listening, then Margaret has gone too far. Claire Pearson is the rightful heir to Pearson Textiles." The silence afterward was thunderous. Brielle's shoulders shook. Her mascara blurred with tears she didn't wipe away. Gerald said nothing. Just stared at the same spot on the table like it might open up and swallow him whole. Margaret stood. "This is fabricated," she spat. "Anyone can record a voice and edit documents." "You're welcome to make that case," Diana cut in smoothly. "But I'd advise caution. We filed for injunctive relief 2 days ago. You are already in violation by convening this meeting. If you proceed, it will be in direct contempt of court." Mr. Hastings adjusted his glasses and looked toward me. "Miss Pearson, do you have independent verification of this identity?" Diana slid another folder toward him. "The original trust signed and notarized by Greta Pearson. Claire, my client, is the sole legal heir. We have birth certificates, photographs, factory witness statements, and the Valentine card in Greta's handwriting." Margaret's knuckles whitened on the edge of her chair. I stepped forward again. "You gave me a fake name to steal what wasn't yours. But I never stopped being Claire Pearson, not even when you tried to erase me." The sentence landed like thunder. Mr. Hastings stood. This transaction is null until legal review is complete. We will not proceed under contested ownership. Margaret moved. She lunged across the table, fingers stretched toward the laptop toward the USB still glowing from its port. Brielle yelped. Gerald didn't move, but 2 uniformed security officers stepped through the door at the same time. "Ma'am," one of them said calmly, "I need you to step back." She froze her hand, hovering inches from the keyboard. For a moment, everything was still just the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of burning fury. Then Margaret slowly lowered her hand and stepped away. And I, Claire Pearson, took my seat at the head of the table. The machines didn't care what name was on the ownership papers, but now finally that name matches the truth. The evening hum of Pearson Textiles was softer than usual, as though the building itself had taken a breath. Outside, the cold had settled over the lot, dusting the security lamps with a faint sheen of frost. Inside, the factory floor glowed with low lights, rows of looms resting like sleeping beasts. Gears stilled wires, humming faintly in anticipation of a new command. I sat alone at the desk in Greta's old office, surrounded by metal file cabinets and the faded wallpaper she'd once chosen. My pen hovered over the top sheet of the new operations binder, and then I wrote it, Claire Pearson, owner and director, each stroke carved deeper than ink. The door creaked open. Evelyn stepped inside with something clutched in her hand, a worn brass key hanging from a velvet ribbon. This was hers, she said, offering it gently. Greta's master key. She never gave it to anyone, but she left it in the same envelope as the trust paperwork. Said it should go to whoever earned it. I took it without a word. It felt heavy, more memory than metal. She would have been proud, Evelyn whispered. She always believed in letting the fabric tell the truth. She left with a quiet nod, and the door clicked shut behind her. I reached for my phone, still buzzing from news alerts, emails, legal confirmations. One notification blinked red voicemail. Gerald Morgan. I stared at it for a long moment, then pressed play. His voice was slower than I remembered, full of pauses. I didn't stop her. And I can't ask for your forgiveness, but I hope you carry this place forward the way Greta wanted. That's all I ever hoped for, really. The silence stretched. Then a soft beep. I deleted it. No anger, no pity, just silence. I opened the bottom drawer of Greta's desk, the one with the tarnished brass handle, and placed the Valentine card inside beside the USB. Both resting in the velvet-lined box Evelyn had found. A legacy not just preserved, but finally acknowledged. The factory floor greeted me like an old friend as I walked the perimeter. I ran my fingers along spools of dyed yarn, still warm from the day's run. The scent of fabric dust oil and steel hung in the air, a familiar comfort now without resentment. Past the loading docks, I found the old maintenance log still clipped to its metal clipboard. I flipped to the latest page and wrote in capital letters, Day 1, restarted under rightful ownership. Then, for the first time, I stamped it with the steel seal Diana had handed me that morning. C. Pearson. Not Rachel. Never Rachel. A flicker of silk caught my eye. Margaret's scarf, forgotten, half-draped over the back of a chair by the emergency staircase. The same one she always wore to board meetings. Crimson with gold-threaded edges, expensive and unmistakable. I carried it without hesitation across the factory floor to the old furnace, long cold, but still used to dispose of unrecyclable threads. I opened the grate. Watched the scarf curl in blackened flames, licking it into non-existence. There was no drama, no vindictive grin, just the quiet crackle of silk turning to ash, and the echo of Aunt Greta's words etched into memory now. Never forget who you are. I hadn't, and now the world wouldn't either. The factory stood quiet, its hum now carrying the rhythm of rightful hands. What was stolen in silence had been reclaimed in the light, not with vengeance, but with truth sealed in steel and memory. Justice, though long delayed, had finally arrived with the quiet certainty of a signature. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Sometimes it takes just one woman remembering her name to burn a legacy of lies to ash.